In September of 1918, the German High Command did something extraordinary. They sent a formal diplomatic protest to the United States government. They weren't protesting the naval blockade that was starving Germany. They weren't protesting the tanks crushing through their defensive lines. They weren't even protesting the 1,000,000 American soldiers arriving each month to reinforce the Western Front. They were protesting a shotgun, specifically a Winchester Model 1897 pump-action shotgun, the same shotgun American farmers used to hunt ducks. The German diplomatic note was unequivocal. Every prisoner found to have in his possession such guns or ammunition belonging thereto forfeits his life. Germany was threatening to execute American prisoners of war for carrying a hunting shotgun. Why? Because in the narrow, muddy hell of Western Front trenches, this simple sporting weapon had become something the German Empire had never faced before, and had come to fear more than almost any other American weapon. This is the story of how a Winchester pump-action shotgun nearly caused an international war crimes tribunal, and why German soldiers began surrendering the moment they heard its distinctive slam-fire sound echoing through the trenches. To understand why the shotgun became such a controversial weapon, we need to understand the unique nightmare of trench warfare in World War I. When the war began in August of 1914, all sides expected a quick, mobile conflict. German generals planned to sweep through Belgium and defeat France within weeks, using the Schlieffen Plan. They were catastrophically wrong. By November of 1914, the Western Front had transformed into a 440-mile scar across Europe, stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Two massive armies faced each other across a devastated no-man's land, living in elaborate trench systems that would barely move for the next 3 years. And when I say elaborate, I'm not talking about simple ditches. These trench systems evolved into underground cities, frontline trenches, support trenches, reserve trenches, all connected by communication trenches. Some German positions had trenches dug 3 stories deep, with concrete bunkers, electric lighting, and even furniture hauled from destroyed French homes. The dimensions were crucial, and here's where the story gets technical. But stay with me, because these numbers are going to matter enormously in just a few minutes. A standard trench measured approximately 6 to 7 feet deep, 3 to 4 feet wide. The fire step, where soldiers stood to shoot, was even narrower, roughly 2 feet wide. Now, hold those numbers in your mind. Between the opposing trenches lay no man's land, typically 200 to 300 yards of churned mud, shell craters, barbed wire, and the unburied dead. Attacking across this killing ground became virtually suicidal. Machine guns could fire 600 rounds per minute. Artillery could drop thousands of shells on a single square mile. The standard infantry tactic of 1870, men walking in formation toward the enemy, now resulted in casualties so horrific they defied comprehension. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, July 1st, 1916, the British Army suffered 57,000 casualties in a single day, nearly 20,000 men killed before noon. Both sides desperately sought new weapons to break the stalemate. The Germans introduced poison gas in 1915. The British developed the tank in 1916. Flamethrowers, hand grenades, and mortars all saw widespread use. But there was another kind of fighting in this war, one that happened in the shadows, in the mud, in the darkness. Trench raids. While the massive artillery bombardments and suicidal charges across no man's land dominate popular memory of World War I, another type of combat happened almost every single night, and it was just as deadly. Trench raids. Small groups of soldiers, usually 20 to 50 men, would silently crawl across no man's land under cover of darkness. Their objectives varied: capture prisoners for interrogation, destroy machine gun nests, gather intelligence, or simply terrorize the enemy and damage morale. These raids required a completely different type of combat than anything military training had prepared soldiers for. And here's where those numbers I mentioned earlier become critical. The standard infantry rifle of World War I was the bolt-action rifle. The British used the Lee Enfield, the Germans the Gewehr. pronounced Gewehr, German for rifle, 98. The Americans, the Springfield M1903. These were excellent weapons for long-range combat. A trained rifleman could hit targets at 600 yards, but in a trench, they were almost useless. Let me paint the full picture here, because this is crucial to understanding why the shotgun would change everything. These rifles typically measured between 43 and 46 inches long, nearly 4 feet. Add a 17-inch bayonet, and you're trying to maneuver a 5-foot-long weapon in a 3-foot-wide trench at night in the mud, while someone is trying to kill you. The bolt action mechanism meant a soldier could fire perhaps 15 rounds per minute under ideal conditions. In the chaos of close-quarters trench combat, with muddy hands, in darkness, maybe 5 or 6 shots per minute if the bolt didn't jam, and reloading. That required extracting a 5-round stripper clip from a pouch, lining it up with the internal magazine, and pushing the rounds down with your thumb. Try doing that while someone is swinging a sharpened trench shovel at your head. A British soldier, Corporal Reginald Glenn, of the West Yorkshire Regiment, wrote in his diary in 1916, "During night raids, my rifle became little more than a long stick with a knife on the end. There was no time to aim, barely time to stab. More than once, I wished I had anything else in my hands." Soldiers quickly realized that trench combat required improvised weapons. They created trench clubs, wooden bats studded with nails, knuckle knives, brass knuckles with blades attached, sharpened entrenching tools used as axes, homemade maces and morning stars, even medieval-style flails. A British officer, Lieutenant Charles Carrington, described night trench raids as more similar to warfare in the 1400s than the 1900s. The combat was brutal, personal, and terrifying. Men fought in near total darkness, often unable to distinguish friend from enemy until they were close enough to touch. The Germans had one significant advantage in close-quarters combat: the steel hand granate, pronounced Stielhandgranate, or stick grenade. This design, an explosive can attached to a wooden handle, could be thrown much farther than British or French grenades, approximately 40 to 50 yards compared to 20 to 30 yards for Allied grenades. In trench raids, German soldiers could often bombard a section of enemy trench with stick grenades before the defenders could effectively retaliate. A French intelligence report from 1917 noted, "The German ability to deliver hand grenades at greater distance grants them significant tactical advantage in night operations. Our forces suffered disproportionate casualties in trench actions." By 1917, trench raids accounted for approximately 15 to 20% of casualties on the Western Front. Small unit actions in trenches and no man's land killed or wounded thousands of soldiers every month. Both sides knew that whoever could dominate the brutal close-quarters fighting in the trenches would have a tremendous psychological and tactical advantage. When the United States entered the war in April of 1917, American commanders studied these trench warfare reports with growing concern. The U.S. Army was largely inexperienced in modern warfare. Most American soldiers had never seen combat. They would be entering the most sophisticated, deadly battlefield environment in human history. American generals asked British and French advisors, what weapons work best for trench fighting? The answer was always the same. You need something that can fire rapidly at close range, something that doesn't require precise aim in darkness and chaos, something that can stop multiple attackers in a confined space. An American ordnance officer had an idea. What about shotguns? The Winchester Model 1897 pump-action shotgun had been in production since, as the name suggests, 1897. For 20 years, it had been one of the most popular sporting shotguns in America, used for hunting everything from ducks to deer. Military planners looked at its specifications and realized it might be the perfect trench warfare weapon. Let me give you the numbers, because when you compare them to the standard rifle I described earlier, you'll see why this was revolutionary. Overall length, 39.6 inches, 4 inches shorter than a rifle. Barrel, 20 inches compared to 24 to 26 inches for a rifle. Weight, 8 pounds, about the same as a rifle. Ammunition, 12-gauge buckshot, 6-round capacity. Rate of fire. This is where it got interesting. The Model 1897 had a unique feature that Winchester had included almost by accident. Unlike later shotguns that required you to release the trigger between shots, the Model 1897 could slam fire. If you held the trigger down and simply pumped the action, the gun would fire every time the action closed. An experienced shooter could fire all 6 rounds in under 3 seconds. Think about what that meant in a trench. A soldier could point the shotgun down a narrow trench and, in 3 seconds, send approximately 54 lead pellets, each .33 caliber, screaming through that confined space at 1,300 feet per second. Standard 12-gauge buckshot loads contain 9 pellets, each .33 caliber, per shell. At 10 yards, typical close-quarters combat distance in trenches, those 9 pellets would create a spread pattern approximately 12 to 18 inches wide. In a trench only 3 to 4 feet wide, this pattern was absolutely devastating. A rifleman had to aim carefully at a single target and hope the bolt mechanism didn't jam in the mud. A shotgunner could point in the general direction and be virtually guaranteed to hit everyone in that section of trench. Even more importantly, the psychological impact. Imagine you're a German soldier on night watch in your trench. It's 2 a.m. You hear movement. You turn, and suddenly there's an American soldier 15 feet away. You see the muzzle flash. You hear boom, shack shack, boom, shack shack, boom. That distinctive sound of the pump action between shots. 6 explosions in 3 seconds. The man next to you goes down. The man behind him goes down. You're hit in the shoulder and leg simultaneously, and the American is already reloading. The U.S. War Department was convinced. In September of 1917, they placed an order for 20,000 Winchester Model 1897 trench guns. Winchester modified the design slightly for military use. A ventilated steel heat shield over the barrel to prevent burned hands, a bayonet lug to mount the standard M1917 bayonet, a sling swivel for carrying, military proof marks. Production ramped up quickly. Winchester's New Haven, Connecticut factory worked around the clock. By early 1918, thousands of these trench guns were being shipped to France. The first units equipped with them were specialized trench raider squads, hand-picked soldiers trained specifically for nighttime close-quarters combat. American soldiers trained extensively with the weapons. They learned to slam fire, to reload quickly in the dark, to clear jams, which were common in muddy conditions. Most importantly, they practiced nighttime trench raid tactics. The strategy was simple, but effective. First, artillery would bombard a section of German trench to keep defenders' heads down. Second, raiding party would cross no man's land under cover of darkness. Third, engineers would blow gaps in German barbed wire with Bangalore torpedoes. Fourth, shotgun-equipped trench sweepers would go in first, clearing the trenches. Fifth, regular infantry would follow to hold the position. By May of 1918, American forces were fully engaged along the Western Front. The German spring offensive had pushed the Allies back, and desperate fighting raged across multiple sectors. This was where the trench gun saw its first major combat use. After-action reports from American commanders tell a remarkable story. One report stated, "Enemy resistance in trenches collapsed rapidly when engaged by shotgun-armed troops. Enemy soldiers visible in trenches were often incapacitated by single discharge. Weapon proved highly effective in confined spaces and darkness." Another report stated, German prisoners expressed extreme fear of the shotgun weapon. Several stated they would prefer to face machine gun fire rather than American spray guns in trench combat. According to U.S. Army records, trench raids conducted with shotgun-armed point men resulted in 30% fewer American casualties compared to raids without shotguns, 50% higher rate of successful objective completion, significantly faster trench clearance times. The weapon worked exactly as intended, but something else was happening that American commanders didn't initially notice. German soldiers weren't just afraid of the shotguns, they were furious about them. On September 14th, 1918. The German government sent a formal diplomatic protest to the United States through neutral Switzerland. The language was extraordinary. The German government protests against the use of shotguns by American troops and calls attention to the fact that according to the laws of war, every prisoner found to have in his possession such guns or ammunition belonging thereto forfeits his life. This was not a casual complaint. This was a threat to execute American prisoners of war. But why? The German protest claimed that shotguns violated the Hague Convention of 1907, specifically the section prohibiting weapons calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. The Hague Convention did indeed state that arms, projectiles, or material calculated to cause unnecessary suffering were forbidden in warfare. Germany argued that shotgun wounds were particularly horrific and inhumane. The multiple pellets from a single shot could cause dozens of separate wounds. Pellets that missed major organs could remain embedded in tissue, causing infections and long-term suffering. On the surface, this might seem like a legitimate legal argument, but there was a problem. Germany was simultaneously using poison gas, chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas that caused days or weeks of agonizing suffocation and chemical burns, flamethrowers, weapons that literally burned men alive in their trenches, explosive bullets, high-velocity rifle ammunition designed to fragment inside the human body, stick grenades, explosives that caused catastrophic trauma and dismemberment. The German government claimed shotguns caused unnecessary suffering while they were deploying weapons specifically designed to cause the most horrific deaths imaginable. The American response, delivered through the State Department, was withering. Secretary of State Robert Lansing replied, "The United States takes exception to the protest of the Imperial German government. The weapon in question is in common sporting use throughout the world and is specifically designed to fire multiple projectiles. It is no more inhumane than the rifles, machine guns, and artillery employed by German forces. The United States categorically rejects the German demand and will continue to equip its forces with whatever weapons its commanders deem appropriate." The Americans then turned the argument around. If the Imperial German government wishes to discuss the humaneness of weapons, the United States government is prepared to discuss the German use of poison gas, flamethrowers, and the deliberate targeting of civilian populations by aircraft and naval bombardment. In diplomatic terms, this was a devastating counterpunch. General John J. Pershing, commander of American forces in France, was even more blunt in his private correspondence. He wrote, "The German protest is a transparent attempt to neutralize an American tactical advantage through diplomatic pressure. The shotgun is no more cruel than any other weapon on this battlefield. I will not disarm my troops based on German sensibilities, particularly not from an enemy that used gas at Ypres and flamethrowers at Verdun." Pershing issued a direct order. Shotgun deployment would continue and actually expand. But what was Germany's real motivation? The official protest cited humanitarian concerns, but German military correspondence tells a different story. Allied intelligence intercepted and decoded several German military messages in late 1918. These revealed the truth. One German regimental commander wrote, "Morale among frontline troops facing American forces has declined noticeably. Men express fear of American spray guns, and the psychological effect is significant. Night raids by Americans have become extraordinarily difficult to defend against." Another message stated, "American shotgun-equipped raiders can clear a trench section in seconds. By the time our soldiers can respond, multiple men are already wounded or killed. The weapon's effect on morale is disproportionate to its actual casualties." Interrogations of German prisoners confirmed this. Multiple POWs stated that they specifically feared encountering American shotgun-equipped troops at night. One German soldier, captured in October of 1918, told his interrogators, "You can fight a man with a rifle. You can fight a man with a machine gun. But the American with the shotgun, you hear that sound, you know you have no chance. Better to surrender immediately." Modern military historians now understand what the German High Command realized in 1918. The shotgun didn't just provide a tactical advantage, it provided a profound psychological advantage. German soldiers knew that in close quarters darkness, their training and equipment couldn't protect them against a weapon that didn't require precision aim and could fire 6 times in 3 seconds. This fear was spreading through German ranks, just as Germany's strategic position was collapsing in the fall of 1918. By September of 1918, the same month as the protest, Germany was losing the war. The spring offensive had failed. American troops were arriving at 250,000 per month. The Hindenburg Line was crumbling. Germany's allies were collapsing. The diplomatic protest was a last-ditch attempt to neutralize one small American advantage at a time when Germany was desperate for any tactical relief. It failed. The American response was a flat refusal. Shotgun deployment continued. The war ended less than 2 months later, on November 11, 1918, with Germany's unconditional surrender. The shotgun protest went nowhere, but the threat to execute captured Americans carrying shotguns? There's no evidence that Germany ever actually carried out this threat. Not a single documented case exists of an American soldier being executed for possessing a shotgun. Most likely, it was an empty threat from a government that knew it was losing and was grasping at any possible advantage. When the war ended, approximately 20,000 Winchester Model 1897 trench guns had been manufactured and deployed to France. Of these, about 3,500 saw actual combat use. American casualties from trench raids remained lower than British or French rates. The shotgun had proven itself as effective as its advocates had hoped, but the story doesn't end there. The trench gun controversy of World War I established a precedent that would echo through the 20th century and beyond. During World War II, American forces again deployed shotguns extensively, this time in the Pacific Theater. The jungles of the Pacific presented similar close-quarters combat challenges as the trenches of France. Fighting in dense vegetation at ranges of 10 to 30 feet made shotguns once again highly effective. And here's where history repeated itself in an almost ironic way. Japanese military commanders also protested the use of shotguns, claiming they were inhumane weapons. The American response was identical to 1918. A flat refusal. American military shotguns continued in service through Korea, 1950 to 1953, urban combat and bunker clearing, Vietnam, 1965 to 1973, jungle patrols and tunnel operations, Gulf War, 1991, urban warfare in Kuwait City, Iraq, 2003 to 2011, house-to-house combat in Fallujah and Baghdad, Afghanistan, 2001 to 2021. Compound clearing operations. Even today, in 2025, the U.S. military still maintains shotguns in its inventory, specifically for breaching doors and close-quarters combat. The modern M26 modular accessory shotgun system serves essentially the same role as the 1918 Winchester trench gun, giving soldiers overwhelming firepower in confined spaces where rifles are less effective. The design has evolved. The M26 is magazine-fed, semi-automatic, and can even mount under an M4 rifle as an accessory. But the fundamental concept remains unchanged for over a century. What about the legal question? Were shotguns actually war crimes? The answer, definitively settled by international consensus, is no. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 and their additional protocols make no specific prohibition against shotguns. The Hague Convention's ban on weapons causing unnecessary suffering has been interpreted by international courts to apply to weapons like exploding bullets, poison, and gas, not to conventional projectile weapons like shotguns. Multiple international tribunals and legal scholars have confirmed that shotguns, when used against military targets, are completely legal under the laws of war. Germany's 1918 protest is now viewed by military historians as a propaganda effort rather than a legitimate legal claim. The irony is that shotguns caused an infinitesimal fraction of World War I casualties. Of approximately 10 million military deaths in World War I, artillery caused approximately 60 to 70%. Machine guns caused approximately 20 to 25%. Rifles caused approximately 8 to 10%. Gas caused approximately 5%. Shotguns, less than 0.01%. The German protest wasn't about casualty numbers, it was about fear. The shotgun represented something psychologically devastating, a weapon that removed the comforting illusion of control that soldiers needed to function in combat. A soldier could tell himself that his rifle training, his marksmanship, his tactical awareness could keep him alive. But against a weapon that fired a spread pattern of 9 pellets, that could hit multiple targets simultaneously, that required no precise aim in the dark, there was nothing you could do but hope you weren't in that 3-foot-wide section of trench when the American came around the corner. By the time the war ended on November 11th, 1918, approximately 116,000 American soldiers had died. The Western Front's trenches had consumed the lives of millions. The men who carried those Winchester Model 1897 shotguns through the mud and darkness of France were ordinary American citizens. Farm boys who had grown up hunting, factory workers, teachers, clerks. They found themselves in the most technologically advanced and brutal war in human history, and they were given a weapon that, in the words of one American sergeant, made a bad situation slightly less bad. Today, surviving Winchester Model 1897 trench guns are prized collector's items. Museums display them as artifacts of a unique moment in military history, when a civilian sporting weapon became a feared instrument of war. The U.S. Army's official designation for the weapon was simply shotgun, trench, 12-gauge. But to the men who faced it in the darkness of the Western Front trenches, it had other names. The German soldiers called it Die Grabenfeger, the trench sweeper. Some called it Die Spraypistole, the spray gun. Others called it Der Schlechter, the butcher. And to the American soldiers who carried it, they called it the gun that made the Germans so angry they threatened to shoot prisoners, which, in the brutal mathematics of trench warfare, meant it was working exactly as intended. But here's something to consider as we close this story. Private First Class James Sullivan from Iowa, 22 years old, killed in action at the Argonne Forest, October 19th, 1918, 3 weeks before the war ended. Corporal William Henderson from Georgia, 24 years old, died of wounds at Chateau Thierry, pronounced Chateau Thierry, July 7th, 1918. Sergeant Thomas O'Brien from Massachusetts, 26 years old, missing in action at Belleau Wood, pronounced Behello Wood, June 6th, 1918. Body never recovered. These men never knew that decades later, we'd still be discussing the weapons they carried. They never knew their shotguns would become museum pieces. They never knew that military historians would write doctoral dissertations analyzing the psychological impact of pump-action firearms in trench warfare. They only knew that when they climbed out of their trenches in the darkness, when they crossed that terrible stretch of no man's land, when they dropped into an enemy trench filled with men who wanted to kill them, they needed something that would give them a chance to see home again. The Winchester 1897 gave them that chance. Between 1917 and 1918, approximately 20,000 Winchester Model 1897 trench guns were manufactured for U.S. military use. Today, fewer than 200 authenticated World War I-era trench guns are known to exist in private and museum collections. Each one represents a story. Each one represents a soldier. Each one represents a moment when technology, desperation, and human ingenuity intersected in the darkness beneath the Western Front, and each one made the Germans angry enough to threaten war crimes charges, which tells you everything you need to know about how effective they really were. Next time on Trench Tales, the French developed a weapon so revolutionary that it nearly changed the outcome of World War I. a self-propelled gun that could keep pace with attacking infantry while providing devastating fire support. The Germans called it Der Tank Hammer, the tank hammer. But by the time the war ended, France had built only 800 of them. Why did French military leadership refuse to build more of the Saint-Chamond 75mm self-propelled gun, even as their own field commanders were begging for them? The answer involves military politics, industrial sabotage, and one general's personal grudge that may have cost thousands of lives. It's a story of innovation crushed by bureaucracy and a weapon that could have ended the war 6 months earlier. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the forgotten stories of the Great War. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday.